just as I wrapped up my journey in Last Recollection, which was amazing by the way. Here comes another Archetype rematch volume, so you know the drill. Time for another exciting 60 cards of new support for archetypes both old and new. And the first on the docket is the very first archetype I actually review on the channel, those being Tech Genus. The first card up to bat is Tech Genus Rocket Salamander. This one is both a Lone Fire Blossom and a Wolfbark for the archetype, which I don't mind one bit, but it would be a tad better if he was a tuner though, because he's a level 1, that's like a perfect level for a tuner, so yeah, that's kind of a bummer there. But then next up we have Tech Genus Mighty Striker. It ain't exactly a Lavalval chain, but it's pretty high up there, and also the abnormally high attack value for a level 2 monster gives you some lovely sprite nostalgia, don't you think? Anyway, next up we have TG Overdragnert, or Tech Genus Overdragnert, whatever. A type of extender many archetypes would kill to have, even though it locks you into its own archetype, and combined with Trident Launcher, this deck could become a potential board setup menace. Let's just hope it doesn't kickstart any annoying ban list parties while we're at it. And finally, for our final monster, we have Tech Genus Glaive Blaster. If only this effect didn't target, man, I'd have stuff to talk about. We'd have quite a scary Quasar level synchro if that was the case, but regardless, this is still the best and hands down the go-to boss monster for the deck currently. Off to the back row, we have 2 spells and a trap. Tech Genus Break Limiter is a fantastic consistency and recycling tool, which almost makes up for the fact that the deck didn't have something like this earlier. Run 3. Tech Genus All Clear, also pretty good for what should be obvious reasons, but I cannot get over the freaking DNA surgery effect. Like, why did they feel the need to put this on? Like, you'll see what I mean when I get to their final card, Tech Genus Close. It's an archetype Alumni Negate, not much else to say here, and it's also the only reason for that DNA surgery effect from the previous card. But then I ask, why bother with that DNA surgery effect, and why not just make the Omni Negate accept non-machine Tech Genus monsters as well? They should have probably made the whole archetype machines from the get-go. But anyway, that was it for the Tech Genus support. It's small, nice and compact, and it actually delivered some very promising cards, which I assume are going to become immediate staples in the deck as the time goes on. But next up we have the Battle in Boxer archetype, which only has one new support card tied to its name, in the form of the spell Ring Announcer. This for sure ain't Michael Buffer, because the generic rank 4 warrior support makes this thing's conclusion highly impractical, so it's best to ignore it. Alright, next up we move on to the Red Dragon Archfiend, or the Red archetype as it's more commonly known. And the first support card is the spell card Absolute Power Force. Those are indeed some very beefy battle boosts, but they are attached to a one-time use quick play spell, which makes it a debatable one-off. Crimson Gaia is next, and this one is a bit better as it finally gives you easier access to all that previously unsearchable back row and throws in a smidgen of recovery for good measure. Fiendish Golem is our first trap card, and I don't think a slightly better Destiny Hero Doom Lord is what this deck really needed, even with the consolation of searching a Fiendish Chain, which is now a part of the archetype. It was a powerhouse for its time, but much better staples have made it completely obsolete. And that was the red support wave, and yeah, Crimson Gaia is probably the best among them, so let's hope that more powerful spell and traps get released so Crimson Gaia could get more mileage out of them. Next up we have Earthbounds with 2 new support cards. The first one being the monster I pointed out was sorely missing from the Earthbound Servant series, Earthbound Servant Geogrimlina. This is their most generic monster to make as of now, and it even gives you some incentive to run the OG Earthbounds if you ever so desire. So there's that at least, and its burn effect can make it a beneficial late game card, or it can basically give a good wake-up call to the opponent if you're like summoning it in the earlier game. And then we have the trap card Earthbound Release. Even though this came from one of my favorite duels in the series, I won't mince words here and say that this is probably the worst possible variation of Ring of Destruction. Next up we have Phantasmal Summoning Beast, the soul card from the Sacred Beasts, which also received support. And, I mean, just run 3 of these. It's a dispenser button for the Sacred Beasts and even searches their fusion spell. What else can I say here that hasn't been said already? Gaia Prominence, the Kindling Seraph, is our next card, and it's the sole support card for the Gaia series of cards. And we have ourselves another format assassin here with some occasional synergy with Infernobles, funnily enough, seeing how his summoning condition is reasonably generic. Run only if you really feel like it. After that, we have a very chunky new debut of this series, as we have the new Yubel support, if you can believe it. And we start off with Samsara Lotus, and besides being a host to an FTK, there's really nothing noteworthy to say about this already existing card at the time of this video, other than the fact that it received a retrain in the form of Samsara Regenerating Lotus. This is now a premier 1-for-1 target, and why is that? I'll get to that in a bit. Grinder Golem is also a card which received a retrain, and this infinite token generator is pretty much still banlist worthy because it's, you know, it can just generate you insane advantage, but again, he also got a retrain, and the retrain is the Geist Grinder Golem, and I'm honestly not sure what the purpose of this thing is, because that life point gain effect is rather pointless and doesn't play into anything. And the only benefit it does is secure a target for Super Poly, which again, I'll get into later. Spirit of Yubel is a long-awaited retrain of the original Yubel, and as a retrain of Yubel, it just does what would expect for a retrain in this day and age, and yeah, it doesn't flat out replace the original, but at least it makes her easier to work with. Yubel does I have no... Why do the Yubel themed cards nowadays have this, like, these weird German phrases as part of the name? It started with the Neos Wiseman, the Neos Kludger, like the retrain of Neos Wiseman. It started there and it continues here. Like, why? I have no idea why, but anyway, let's not dwell on that fact for any longer, and let's instead dwell on the fact that this is hands down the most absurdly powerful Super Poly target in the game's history. True, you need a Yubel monster on the field to do that, but the new Lotus makes it a completely trivial. Also, the Flame Wingman homage is kind of clever as well, and it also plays into the like applicability of their new trap card, which I'll get to in a bit. All right, now we move on to the back row, and we first have to mention Spell Chronicle, which is one of the most overhyped spells in the history of the game. And it's now relegated to a very pricey pack filler garbage. And again, it's the host of the next retrain, that being Mature Chronicle. Much better and easier to use than the original card, and it's highly recommended that you run it. Nothing more to say here. Then we have Nightmare Pain, which is a very critical piece of support and something that the Archetype has been yearning for since day one. Needless to say, run 3. Their last card is an eternal favorite, probably the best fusion trap ever to exist, since it's also a continuous trap, and it's even searchable by the Flame Wingman retrain because of its name. Run 1 or 2 of these. From one debut, we move on to the next, as the next debuting archetype on this series is the Horus archetype, if you could believe it. We start off with Imseti, Glory of Horus. Sorry for the name, I'll probably butcher a few more of them down the line. Anyway, the summoning condition here is shared by all non-dragon monsters of this support wave, and this card also happens to search the required card needed for the summoning condition, and as a cherry on top, it punishes the opponent for removing your stuff with a hard to respond removal effect. Run 3. Duamutef, I hope I'm pronouncing this right. Blessing of Horus. Okay, I'm gonna pronounce these names just like... I'm not gonna pronounce their names, I'm just gonna read the descriptors. It's a potentially big payoff both in big numbers and in card economy. It can definitely help out in closing out games if you don't have access to access code Tarkar or you need a bigger push, whatever the reason. Vanguard is a pretty serviceable recovery tool and nothing more, as its stats are a bit underwhelming for the level. Aegis of Horus, and yeah, this could potentially be some decent protection, but the way it's applied is a bit too reckless and slow, so run any number of these if you feel like it. Now we have the retrain of Horus, Horus the Black Flame Deity. It's not exactly a boss monster, but it's safe to say it helps out set the stage for the original Horus level 8 if you feel like running him. Pharaonic Sarcophagus, which was mentioned in the previous cards, now it is a much better protection effect than Aegis, and it also helps you clear stuff out during the battle phase, so not to mention you kind of need to run it, so run it. Then we have the archetypal field spell Stone Wall of the Imperial Tombs. It's an archetypal field spell, like I said, and has free consistency, so naturally you run 3. The last card is Canopic Protector. Since it's a once per chain, I feel this can pick up most of the slack when it comes to monsters being a tad too bricky in certain situations. It's also a semi-recursive, so that's a plus as well. Next up we have another archetype which only got 1 card worth of support, those being Noble Knights. Camelot Realm of Noble Knights and Noble Arms is their new field spell, and dear god, this is like the first genuinely thought out piece of support for the OG Noble Knights since the day they came out. Yeah, sure, you can also use it for Imper Nobles if you really feel like it, and it also gives you incentive of running the old field spell, so needless to say, max out on this and, like, you know what, run 5, they'll never notice. Next up we have another 1 card wonder in the form of Rescue Hedgehog, and it's another debut archetype for this series. It has a potentially useful effect, but it's held back by the fact that not many archetypes run normal and effect monsters side by side. So I guess this guy is stuck with Sun Avalons for the time being, as it's the only archetype I can think of that has like a gimmick close to what this guy is promoting. Oh boy, now it's time for a very hefty support lineup and another debut. Goblins make their debut in this series with a whole new sub-archetype to boot, that being the Goblin Riders. We start off with Goblin Rider Clutter the Noisy. Out of the new bunch, this is one of the this one is the most spammable, as he's both a recursion and the wolf bark and a wolf park attached to his name. So yeah, you definitely want to run 3 of these. Goblin Rider Boon the Mach Speed. The extension / recovery is once again in full swing here, although it is a bit sad that it's the only thing he does, but still it's hardly the worst of the bunch. Goblin Rider Doug the Assaulter is pretty straightforward, as it's an on-summon back row searcher, not much else to say here. Goblin Rider Mianda the Cold-Blooded, I can't wait to see how the TCG nerfs these names. It has the exact same effect as Noisy, except it's a first effect special summons from the hand. Not much else to say here, also run 3. Then we have Goblin Paratrooper Squad, which is the only new card of the bunch which sticks to the original theme of goblins. Yeah, it's obviously meant to be paired with Goblinberg, but you're better off saving deck space for more proactive monsters rather than a gimmicky novelty. Moving on to the Goblin Riders, we have Goblin Rider Big Head Gabonga. Aside from being a 3-off staple due to it being an on-summon searcher, it also introduces a very unique gimmick of Xyz monsters being used exclusively to fuel the effects of main deck monsters. So I'm guessing Goblin Riders are like wannabe Zodiacs? Not even close. Anyway, next up we have their final monster, Goblin's Crazy Beast. It's a perfectly okay boss monster for this subtype, but it's bogged down by the fact that it requires a gimmicky spell card in order to be summoned, meaning it's not a good go-to boss monster in most situations, given that it's a rank 6 and the Goblin Riders are rank 3 spammers. Grand Arrival of the Goblin Riders is our first spell card for this sub-archetype, and once again consistency and recycling all in one package, so naturally you run 3. Grand Meeting of the Goblin Riders, and yeah, this is the only reason why people would run this on a frequent basis is because of the double summon effect, and the level switching. It will rarely, if ever, come into play unless you really feel like playing the Crazy Beast or any other rank 6 monster in Goblins of all things. Anyway, the last card the Goblin Riders have is the Goblin Rider Stampede. Spot negation and quick effect overlaying, which would mean something more if the archetype had more monsters with quick effects on summon effects. But as of now, it's potentially useful and will only be more useful if we actually get some monsters to take advantage of this card's effect. Okay, so that was a pretty hefty support line of goblins, and not something I expected, honestly. And next up we have, I think we have several one-card wonders. Yeah, we have 3 of them in a row. First up, we have Cyberdarks with a retrain of Future Fusion over Future Fusion. It's an archetypal retrain, like I said, of Future Fusion, which is both a Fusion Conscription and an Overload Fusion in one. And yeah, it's generic as well, so I guess you feel free to run any number of these. Phantom Beasts are next with Baphomet the Phantom Beast Dark Ruler. I'm guessing he's supposed to help you out, set up summoning some hard to summon monsters with disruption effects, because by how these effects are designed, I honest to God see no other use for this guy. And given that we do not have many monsters that this thing can take advantage of, he's once again, like the Goblin Trap card, potentially useful and not much else. Next up we have Volcanics with, again, 1 card worth of support in the form of Fire Recovery. Volcanics at long last get something besides Royal Firestorm guards to recycle their ammo, although besides Rocket and maybe a few boss monsters, there aren't many monsters Volcanics would like to put onto the field instead of fetching them to the hand. These effects should have been reversed in my opinion, and it would have worked a bit better for that. Next up we have the Sharks slash like Xyz stuff. Yeah, Sharks slash Barian Number. Yeah, it's more Shark than Barian Number, but anyway, you'll see what I mean when we get to their first monster, Xyz Armor Torpedo. This new wave of support is essentially the Magistus archetype in Xyz form, and this one is fairly standard when it comes to its utility and showing off what the archetype, what the subtype is supposed to be doing. Xyz Armor Fortress is the next card, and this one is arguably even better due to it being a searcher, and it also allows the equipped monsters to hit even harder, but the lack of an inherent equip effect is a bit of a downside compared to the previous card. Full Armored Dark Lancer. Needless to say, this thing equipped with Fortress can be a pretty big beatstick that occasionally recycles Xyz back row, which beyond Xyz gift isn't all that relevant in the long run. Armored Xyz is the first spell card, and this is the main card that this new wave of support centers around, so naturally you'll want to run 3 of them. Xyz Entrust is the other and final spell card, and your main engine starter, which also you run 3 copies of, even though the second effect isn't too prevalent in the grand scheme of things. Full Armored Xyz is the final card, and it's not a replacement to the original Armored Xyz, but it's more like a variant. The usefulness of this depends on how many Xyz monsters with quick effects you feel like running, so once more, you run this card by preference. Alright, we only have 2 archetypes left to go, and both of them have 2/3 cards worth of support. Okay, so the first archetype we're taking a look at now is the Signar Dragon archetype with 2 new cards worth of support. The first one being Shining Star Dragon. Really mixed feelings on this one because the range of stuff you could summon with this thing without ignoring summoning conditions is so tiny that it's barely even worth it. Like, imagine dropping a King Calamity with this thing. Now, sadly, that is not the case. Like, the only monster you could summon with this is Crimson Dragon, the new Synchro. And unless you have the appropriate setup to utilize his effect, this thing can be, like, very bricky to consider running. And the other card is Synchro Rumble, and it's a very simple and to the point return of the Dragon Lords for the Signer Dragons, and you'd be silly not to run 3 of these. And the last archetype to get new support is the Memento archetype. Currently the newest archetype analysis on the channel still. And we have Memento Attic Ghost based on Wretched Ghost of the Attic. We finally have a level 2 in the archetype, so no more Schrodinger's effects. And whose effect was it? Like, I think it was Key Mace effect or Goblin's effect that also mentioned searching level 2 monster. But anyway, this is the first level 2 of the archetype, like I already said, and it's also a recycler for any card in the archetype with recursion, so feel free to run any number of these. And it also combos quite well with the next card, Memento Dark Blade, of course being based on Dark Blade. A prototype Lone Fire Blossom for the archetype, and like I said, it has a fun combo with Attic Ghost to get some okay-ish field presence on board. It's also highly searchable due to its type and attribute, so it would be silly not to run any less than 3 of these. And that was volume 15. Wow, I'm getting very, very good and very, very fast at these, and still no Blue Eyes support. I'm keeping my fingers crossed. I do not want to uncross them. I legitimately do not want to see another Blue Eyes ever again. Unless it's Blue Eyes White Cat, which I recently found out because it's a Rush Duel exclusive. Like, why don't we have this in the regular game? I would actually like to see these cat-themed ones arrive in the actual game. In the mainstream game, I should say. Who knows what volume 16 will bring us? Well, actually, I do know, since I do have 7 cards already present in the volume 16 folder, so you'll have to wait and see what that volume brings. I'm really hoping still I would get Fortune Ladies by the next time we are here in this series. But as for now, thank you all so much for watching. Stay tuned for more virtual quizzes and updates. Have yourselves a great day, and I will see you all next time.